Imagine standing on a high bluff at dawn, 110 feet above the gentle lap of Gull Lake's waters in southwestern Michigan. The air carries the fresh scent of lake mist and pine. Before you rises a majestic Tudor Revival manor. Its steeply pitched roof clad in colorful Adalcite tiles that catch the first light like old-world armor. Half-timbered walls, dark oak beams crisscrossing pale stucco panels, leaded glass windows framed with heraldic motifs. All evoke an English countryside estate that could have stood for centuries. Yet this home was completed in 1926, a deliberate creation of timeless elegance on what had once been eroded cornfields. This is a W.K. Kellogg manor house, known affectionately and perhaps ironically by its builder as simply the cottage. At 15,000 square feet, it sprawls across the highest knoll of a 32-acre estate, commanding 1,600 feet of private shoreline. W.K. Kellogg, the man behind Kellogg's Cornflakes, was 65 when he moved in. By then, his company produced 120,000 boxes of cereal every day, a breakfast revolution that had made him one of America's wealthiest individuals. After a lifetime of frugality, servitude, and watching others profit from his efforts, he finally built something grand, personal, and immediate. Kellogg selected the site carefully, 15 miles from Battle Creek headquarters, close enough for business but far enough for respite. He hired the Grand Rapids firm Benjamin & Benjamin to translate his vision, a gentleman's retreat that felt ancient and rooted, blending revivalist charm with practical summer comfort. The architects delivered a masterpiece of asymmetry and detail. Oversized stone fireplaces, oak coffered ceilings, rookwood tile accents in bathrooms and hearths, and bay windows that framed sweeping lake views. Construction began in 1925. Major work wrapped in 1926, with landscaping perfected by 1927. The cost reached around $400,000 to $747,000. Sources vary slightly on exact figures, staggering when the average American home cost about $7,000. But Kellogg refused half measures. When landscapers proposed planting young trees that would mature over decades, he balked. "At my age," she reportedly said, "you can't wait for trees to grow." Mature specimens were transplanted wholesale, their root balls wrapped and hauled in to create instant maturity. The grounds transformed rapidly into a complete English-inspired landscape, rolling lawns, formal gardens, and ornamental structures that extended the manor's presence outward. The estate was more than a house. It included a carriage house with chauffeur's quarters, a caretaker's cottage for privacy near the entrance, a greenhouse and potting shed that supplied fresh flowers, citrus, and roses year-round for daily bouquets inside. A boathouse extended into the lake with wells for powerboats and sailboats, its upper level equipped as a bathhouse for guests. An authentic Dutch windmill, purely decorative but meticulously detailed, rose on Windmill Island, turning lazily as a whimsical landmark. A lakeside pagoda added an exotic oriental touch to the otherwise English setting, its graceful lines reflecting over the water. In 1927, Kellogg established a nearby Kellogg Bird Sanctuary on adjacent lands around Wintergreen Lake, about 180 acres initially fenced off, originally to breed game birds and protect migratory species like the then endangered Canada goose. He deeded it to Michigan State College, now university, in 1928, ensuring long-term conservation. The sanctuary, intersecting major flyways, became a haven for waterfowl and wildlife education, another layer of legacy on what began as his personal domain. To W.K., this was no ostentatious palace. He called it a cottage, a term that carried either extreme modesty or a quiet, private joke. For a man who grew up in poverty, dropped out of school at 13, sold brooms door to door, and spent 25 years as his brother's overworked bookkeeper, this place represented everything denied him earlier: beauty, leisure, family joy, and control. He and his second wife, Dr. Carrie Staines Kellogg, a physician from the Battle Creek Sanitarium days, moved in during 1926. Almost immediately, they deeded the property to the city of Battle Creek with a vision. It should become a place where all of Battle Creek may forever play. They retained a life lease, allowing them to live there as long as they wished, while opening the grounds to community. The manor became a summer haven. Grandchildren arrived for extended stays, playing billiards in the game room, exploring the vast lawns, splashing along the shore, or getting into harmless mischief across the acres. W.K., who once wrote in his diary that he never learned to play as a boy due to strict Adventist upbringing and endless work, watched new generations enjoy what he had missed. He installed a silent film projection system for private movie nights, sitting in the darkened room as stories unfolded, moments of pure entertainment after decades balancing ledgers and enduring humiliation. Yet beneath the grandeur lay deeper intent. This cottage was a statement of arrival. After years of being treated as a servant, running beside his brother's bicycle with notebook in hand, taking dictation even in the bathroom, always addressing him as Dr. Kellogg, W.K. had something undeniably his own. The estate symbolized triumph over shadow, a space where he could finally breathe, reflect, and share. But triumph carried shadows of its own. Personal tragedies would touch these grounds, and family rifts would echo across the lake. The man who built this paradise had risen from nothing, revolutionized American breakfast, and given away millions through his foundation. Yet the story of how he reached this hill and what it cost begins far earlier, in the religious soil of Battle Creek and the complicated bond between two brothers. In the 1860s, Battle Creek, Michigan, was a quiet crossroads town of modest homes, small factories, and wide dirt streets. Yet it pulsed with extraordinary purpose. This southwestern corner of the state had become the spiritual epicenter of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a rapidly growing religious movement convinced that the second coming of Christ was imminent, perhaps within their lifetime. Thousands of believers had gathered here, drawn by the visions and teachings of Ellen G. White and her husband James White. They rejected meat, alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, and stimulants of any kind. They kept the Sabbath on Saturday, observed strict health principles, and viewed the human body as a sacred temple to be purified for the Lord's return. Diet, hygiene, and simple living were not mere preferences. They were divine mandates. Into this fervent world stepped the Kellogg family. John Preston Kellogg, a farmer-turned-broom-maker from Massachusetts, had embraced revivalist movements over the years, Baptists, Congregationalists, and finally the Adventists. In 1856, he moved his large family to Battle Creek to be closer to the church's heart. There he established a broom factory, contributing financially to the denomination's publishing work and the fledgling health initiatives. His second wife, Jeanette Stanley, often called Annetta or Annette, bore him 11 children, adding to the 5 from his first marriage. Of the 16 total, 6 died young from infectious diseases, a grim reminder of the era's fragility and the family's deep anxiety about health, mortality, and divine judgment. John Harvey Kellogg arrived first, on February 26, 1852, in Tyrone Township before the family fully settled in Battle Creek. Frail and sickly from childhood, he suffered repeated bouts of tuberculosis that left his left lung largely compromised. Yet his intellect shone brightly. Church leaders, including Ellen White herself, noticed the boy's promise early. They saw potential in his curiosity and drive. At age 12, he began working for the Whites as an errand boy, printer's devil, proofreader, and editorial assistant for their publications like The Health Reformer. Sponsored by the church, John Harvey received an education others in the family could only dream of. He studied briefly at the Hygiotherapeutic College in New Jersey, then at the University of Michigan Medical School, and finally at Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York City. By 1875, at age 23, he held a medical degree. The following year, he returned to Battle Creek as superintendent of the struggling Western Health Reform Institute, a small Adventist clinic founded in 1866 to apply the church's health principles. He renamed it the Battle Creek Medical Surgical Sanitarium, shortened to the SAN, coining the term Sanitarium to blend ideas of sanitation, health restoration, and serene retreat. Under his leadership, it would grow into America's most famous health resort. 8 years younger, Will Keith Kellogg, born April 7, 1860, followed a starkly different path. The 7 of the 16 children, sometimes counted as the 12th depending on half-siblings, he grew up in the same strict Adventist household. No meat, no stimulants, Saturday's Sabbath, constant vigilance over body and soul. But where John Harvey was celebrated, what was overlooked. His poor eyesight went undiagnosed for years. He struggled to see the blackboard, and teachers assumed he was slow or dim-witted. Family expectations aligned with that view. No one thought to check his vision or provide extra support. Labeled the family's disappointment. Will internalize the low expectations. At age 13 or 14 in some accounts, he dropped out of school entirely. His father put him to work in the broom factory, sorting broom corn, tying handles, and soon selling door to door. The teenage will learn the hard lessons of business early, pitching products to skeptical housewives, handling rejection, calculating margins, managing inventory, and surviving on minimal pay. While his older brother pursued medical school and church sponsorship, will travel local routes, knocking on doors and building resilience through toil. He briefly tried running a broom business in Kalamazoo, but it failed, sending him back to Battle Creek. By 1876, at 16, he walked through the doors of the newly renamed Battle Creek Sanitarium, not as a patient seeking cure, but as an employee. John Harvey needed someone reliable to handle the books, correspondence, supplies, and administrative details of the growing institution. Will needed a job. The arrangement felt natural. The brilliant doctor and his overlooked younger brother, side by side in service to the same cause. It would last 25 years. Yet the dynamic was unequal from the start. John Harvey's intellect and charisma drew patrons, presidents, and celebrities to the San. Will labored in the background, managing the endless practicalities that kept the operation running. The brothers' childhoods in Battle Creek had diverged sharply, one groomed for leadership, the other consigned to support. Those early patterns were hardened into the foundation of their later conflict. Inventions shared, credit contested, and a family name that would become both a bond and a battleground. The roots of Cornflakes, the Feud, and the lakeside manor traced back to this small Michigan town, where religious zeal, health reform, and humble beginnings set two brothers on colliding trajectories. One would become the famous physician reforming American wellness. The other, the quiet bookkeeper who would one day transform breakfast for millions. But first, they would work together in the shadow of the San, where eccentric treatments met daily drudgery, and a simple health food experiment would spark an empire, an enduring rift. The Battle Creek Sanitarium in the late 19th and early 20th centuries was unlike any medical institution America had ever seen. It was part luxury resort, part health experiment, part religious mission. At its center stood John Harvey Kellogg, 5 feet 4 inches tall, always dressed head to toe in immaculate white linen, a white cockatoo perched on his shoulder like a living epaulet. Behind round spectacles, a neatly trimmed pointed beard gave him the appearance of a Victorian prophet. Patients and staff alike remembered him instantly. To them, he was the most famous physician in the country, a man who claimed to have revolutionized human health through diet, hydrotherapy, and relentless discipline. Under John Harvey's direction, the San grew explosively. What began as a modest Adventist clinic in 1866 expanded into a 30-acre campus with more than 30 buildings. The main structure alone could accommodate over 1,300 guests at a time. Between 800 and 1,000 employees, nurses, physicians, cooks, masseurs, and administrators, kept the operation humming. 30 doctors served on staff. The clientele was extraordinary. Presidents William Howard Taft, Warren G. Harding, and Calvin Coolidge all came seeking restoration. Thomas Edison arrived when exhaustion threatened his inventive mind. Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone retreated here to escape the pressures of industry. Amelia Earhart prepared for her transatlantic flights within its walls. John D. Rockefeller Jr. sought refuge after the Ludlow massacre damaged his family's reputation. The San had become the place where America's elite went to be cleansed, rebalanced, and reborn. The treatments were as eccentric as they were earnest. John Harvey believed that 90% of human disease originated in the digestive tract. His solution was radical. Clean it out, repopulate it with beneficial bacteria, and keep it calm. Patients received multiple high-volume enemas every day. Sometimes 15 quarts of water pumped through the bowels in a single minute using a custom machine John Harvey designed himself. He took one every morning and another at midday. Yogurt, believed to colonize the intestines with healthy flora, was administered both orally, half a pint swallowed, and rectally, the other half delivered directly. For those needing extra stimulation, there was the vibrating chair, a wooden seat that shook violently at up to 60 oscillations per second, designed to promote peristalsis. It often succeeded immediately and involuntarily. Light therapy cabinets bathed patients in dozens of electric bulbs. Sinusoidal machines sent mild electrical currents through the body. Mechanical horses provided exercise for those too weak to ride real ones. President Coolidge enjoyed his Sanitarium horse so much he had one installed in the White House. John Harvey's deepest and most controversial obsession, however, was sex. He married Ella Eaton in 1879, but the marriage was never consummated. The couple maintained separate bedrooms for life. Instead of biological children, they fostered 42 orphans and legally adopted 8. In his widely read books and packed lecture halls, Kellogg railed against what he called the solitary vice, masturbation. He warned it caused poor posture, acne, weak vision, heart palpitations, epilepsy, and insanity. His proposed remedies were extreme. For boys, circumcision performed deliberately without anesthesia, so the pain would create a lifelong beneficial association against the act. In severe cases, suturing the foreskin shut to make erections impossible. For girls, he recommended applying carbolic acid directly to the clitoris. These were not fringe ideas whispered in private. They were published in best-selling books and delivered to enthusiastic audiences. The entire dietary program of the San was partly designed to suppress sexual desire. Heavy, flavorful foods were thought to inflame the passions. Bland, simple fare, grains, nuts, fruits, vegetables would keep the body calm and the urges dormant. It was in this context that the Kellogg brothers first experimented with flake cereals. John Harvey wanted a digestible, bland breakfast food that aligned with Adventist principles. In the Sanitarium kitchen, they developed processes to roll and toast wheat and corn into crisp, light flakes. These early cereals were served to patients as part of a health regimen, not as a commercial product. All the while, in the shadow of this flamboyant medical empire, stood Will Keith Kellogg, quiet, methodical, indispensable, and increasingly resentful. Will arrived each day before dawn and rarely left before midnight. He kept the books, handled mountains of correspondence, scheduled appointments, ordered supplies, supervised staff, and managed the endless administrative details that allowed his brother's grand vision to function. He worked 120 hours a week for minimal pay. But the workload was not the worst part. The worst part was the daily humiliation. John Harvey expected his younger brother to be available at all times, in all circumstances. When the doctor rode his bicycle around the sanitarium grounds, Will had to run alongside, notebook and pencil in hand, ready to capture any passing thought or instruction. When John Harvey used the toilet, Will was required to stand nearby with pen and paper, taking dictation so the great physician would not waste a single moment. Will was forbidden to call his brother by his first name or even brother. He had to address him always as Dr. Kellogg, a constant reminder of hierarchy, of master and servant. For 25 years, Will accepted the arrangement. He had no formal education beyond broom selling. He had no capital. He had no connections outside Battle Creek. Where else could he go? But resentment simmered. He watched imitators like C.W. Post grow wealthy selling health foods inspired by Sanitarium ideas. He saw dozens of cereal companies spring up in Battle Creek, all profiting from the same health food craze he helped sustain. By 1906, Will Keith Kellogg was 46 years old. He had spent his entire adult life making other people rich. First his father, then his brother. He had balanced ledgers, endured condescension, and swallowed pride while the man he called Dr. Kellogg became famous. February 19th, 1906, marked the quiet end of one era and the explosive start of another. At 46 years old, Will Keith Kellogg, tired of shadows, tired of 120-hour weeks, tired of dictation in bathrooms, founded the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company. He bought out his brother's interest in the cereal side business for a modest sum. John Harvey barely blinked. To him, the flake corn product was a minor dietary tool for sanitarium patients, not a commercial gold mine. He returned to reforming American health through enemas, yogurt implants, and vibrating chairs. Will Keith, however, saw the future in breakfast bowls across the nation. He understood something his brother never grasped. Americans didn't want medicine for breakfast. They wanted something tasty, convenient, and reliable. The original Sanitarium recipe was bland, deliberately so, to suppress passions and promote purity. Will added sugar and salt for flavor, transforming the dry, health food flakes into something people actually craved. He also invested heavily in marketing, something John Harvey had never prioritized. In 1906, Will spent one-third of his startup capital on a single, audacious advertisement in Ladies' Home Journal. The ad instructed housewives to wink at your grocer and see what you get. Grocerers who received the wink handed over a free sample box of Kellogg's toasted cornflakes. The campaign was daring, playful, almost risque for the era. In New York City alone, sales surged 15-fold. Housewives winked on designated Wink Wednesdays. Grocers handed out samples, and word spread like wildfire. Within a year, Will was shipping trainloads of cereal to the city. He followed with relentless promotion, more ads, more free samples, billboards, and newspaper campaigns. But the most personal touch came on every box. Will placed his signature, W.K. Kellogg, prominently on the front panel, a handwritten guarantee of quality and authenticity. The original bears a signature, the packaging declared. That signature, still familiar on Kellogg's boxes today, was revolutionary in 1906. In an age of generic products and rampant imitations, it built consumer trust and differentiated his flakes from the dozens of copycats flooding Battle Creek. Success came fast. Production ramped up. The company became profitable within months. Will's business acumen, honed from broom-selling days, proved unstoppable. He understood branding, distribution, and the power of advertising in the new consumer century. By the late 1910s, his company was a force, with cornflakes appearing on breakfast tables nationwide. John Harvey watched with growing irritation. He had never intended cereal to become big business, but seeing his younger brother thrive on the idea they had jointly developed stung. In 1908, he launched his own cereal line under the Kellogg name through his Sanitas, later Kellogg Food Company. He sold products like sterilized bran flakes and corn-based cereals, sometimes in packaging that mimicked his brother's. Consumers grew confused. Which Kellogg was a real one? The famous doctor who treated presidents and preached purity, or the businessman whose signature promised quality in every box? The confusion ignited legal war. By 1910, lawsuits flew. Will filed first to stop his brother from using the family name on cereal products. John Harvey countersued. They settled briefly out of court in 1911, with murky terms that satisfied neither side. Tensions simmered. Will expanded into bran flakes and all bran. John Harvey pushed his own health food lines. In 1916, the battle reignited in earnest. Each accused the other of unfair competition and trading on reputation. The case reached the Michigan Supreme Court. The trial lasted a full month. Witnesses recounted the Sanitarium's history, the accidental discovery of flake cereals in the kitchen, and the meaning of Kellogg in American commerce. John Harvey took the stand as the world-famous physician, author of best-selling books, inventor of the Sanitarium concept, healer to Taft, Edison, and Ford. For decades, Kellogg had meant health reform, medical authority, and moral discipline. He argued he was the original Kellogg. Will presented a different story. He had spent millions advertising Kellogg's toasted cornflakes. His signature appeared on every package. His company had made the name synonymous with breakfast cereal in grocery stores across the country. When a housewife reached for a box, she thought not of a doctor in a white suit, but the product he had built, marketed, and guaranteed. In December 1920, the Michigan Supreme Court delivered its verdict. Will Keith Kellogg won decisively. He gained exclusive rights to use the Kellogg name on cereal products in the United States, later extended internationally. John Harvey was ordered to pay back profits his company had earned over the prior decade. The legal triumph was total. The personal cost was permanent. After the ruling, the brothers rarely spoke. When business demanded they meet, Will insisted on a neutral third party present. He refused to be alone in a room with a man who had treated him as a servant for 25 years. The decades of condescension, the humiliation, the fight over credit for cornflakes, all had calcified into irreparable estrangement. They lived in the same small city. Their names appeared on products in every American home. Yet they inhabited separate worlds. One the fading health reformer, the other the rising cereal king. The rift that began in childhood expectations hardened in sanitarium shadows, and exploded in court would last their lifetimes. But for Keith Kellogg, the victory cleared the path. Free of his brother's shadow, he could build an empire, and soon a lakeside manor to mark his arrival, with the court victory in 1920 securing his exclusive right to the Kellogg name on cereal products. Well, Keith Kellogg entered a new chapter. At 60, he was no longer the overlooked bookkeeper or the humiliated younger brother. He was the architect of an empire that fed millions every morning. His company thrived, expanding production, innovating products like All Brand, and solidify its place in American culture. Freed from legal battles and family shadows, will turn his attention to building a personal legacy, one that blended hard-won success with quiet generosity. The Gull Lake Estate, completed in 1926 and refined through 1927, became the physical embodiment of this shift. He and his second wife, Dr. Carrie Staines Kellogg, made it their summer retreat. Carrie, a physician who had worked at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, married Will on January 1st, 1918, 6 years after the death of his first wife, Ella Osborne Davis, in 1912. Their union was childless, but the manor welcomed extended family. Will's children from his first marriage, Carl Hugh, John Leonard, and Elizabeth, and the survivors of 5, and their growing broods visited often. Grandchildren filled the grounds with laughter and play, running across manicured lawns, splashing along the 1,600-foot shoreline, exploring the boathouse, or peering at the ornamental Dutch windmill turning in the breeze. For Will, who had once confided in his diary that he never learned to play as a boy, raised in strict Adventist discipline and endless chores, these scenes carried deep meaning. He watched a new generation enjoy freedoms he had never known. The manor's billiard room echoed with games. Its silent film projection system hosted family movie nights in the darkened screening room, and the greenhouse supplied fresh flowers and citrus year-round for the table. The pagoda by the lake added an unexpected exotic note to the English landscape, while the nearby bird sanctuary, established in 1927 on lands around Wintergreen Lake, drew migratory Canada geese and other species, offering a quiet place to observe nature's rhythms. Yet triumph was shadowed by profound personal losses. In 1913, his grandson Kenneth Stanley, son of Elizabeth Ann, fell from a second-story window onto a concrete driveway. The toddler survived but suffered permanent disabilities that required lifelong care. Watching Kenneth struggle affected Will deeply. It fueled a lifelong commitment to children's welfare. In 1925, around the time the manor took shape, another family fracture emerged. His son John Leonard Kellogg, brilliant, inventive, and long seen as the heir apparent, had worked at the company for 17 years. John Leonard invented the wax paper box lining that kept cereal fresh, developed All Brand, and held over 200 patents. But personal choices strained the relationship. A divorce from his first wife and remarriage to his secretary, plus his purchase of an independent oatmeal brand, which was viewed as disloyalty to the family enterprise. In 1925, Will fired John Leonard and cut ties completely. Father and son never spoke again. The estrangement extended over time. 2 surviving sons eventually broke contact with their father. Another grandson, groomed as successor after John Leonard's departure, rose through the ranks but crumbled under pressure. In 1938, he suffered a mental breakdown and took his own life. The man who built a company feeding millions lost his own family in pieces. Sons refusing contact, grandsons damaged or gone. Blindness struck next. Diagnosed with glaucoma in 1937, the disease progressed rapidly. By the early 1940s, Will was legally blind, navigating the world in darkness. Yet he refused to retreat. He continued attending board meetings, visiting the factory floor, and making decisions, always guided by loyal German shepherds descended from the famous Rin Tin Tin line. When directors suggested cutting advertising during hard times, he overruled them, insisting on a $1 million increase. He understood that crises were moments to fight harder for visibility. Amid these personal storms, Will channeled his wealth into lasting good. In June 1930, at the onset of the Great Depression, he founded the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, initially the W.K. Kellogg Child Welfare Foundation. He donated $66 million over his lifetime, More than half is Kellogg Company stock. Focusing on children's health education and welfare, the foundation pioneered inclusive education for disabled children, inspired partly by Kenneth, built hospitals and clinics, trained nurses and doctors, and fed hungry families when parents had nothing or rejected any notion of saintliness. "I am a selfish person and no philanthropist," he said. "I love to do things for children because I get a kick out of it." The gifts were his way of giving back what he had missed in childhood. Opportunity, care, and hope. The manor itself reflected this spirit. Almost immediately after moving in, Will and Carrie deeded the property to the city of Battle Creek, with condition it should become a place where all of Battle Creek may forever play. They retained a life lease, ensuring they could stay. The grounds open to community, embodying Will's desire for shared joy. World events intruded. In 1942, as World War II escalated, the Kellogg's loaned the estate to the U.S. Coast Guard for induction and training, known as the Gull Lake Camp. Some 5,000 enlistees passed through for medical exams, uniforms, and initial drills. Will and Carrie moved to a smaller house nearby. In 1944, the property became a convalescent annex for Percy Jones Army Hospital, housed in the old Sanitarium building, where wounded soldiers rehabilitated amid recreation and lake views. Carrie never returned. She died in 1948 at her family home in Fenwick, Michigan. Will lived on, blind but active, until October 6, 1951. The manor, after military use, stood empty briefly before the W.K. Kellogg Foundation transferred it to Michigan State University in 1952. It became the Kellogg Gull Lake Biological Station, used for research and education, preserving the grounds where a serial king once planted instant forests and watched grandchildren play. Triumph had come at a steep price. The empire endured, but family bonds fractured. The cottage by the lake stood as both a haven of joy and a silent witness to loss. By the early 1940s, the once mighty figures of the Kellogg brothers had dimmed. John Harvey Kellogg, the white-clad doctor who commanded America's elite to his sanitarium, faced decline. The Battle Creek Sanitarium had gone bankrupt in the 1930s amid the Great Depression and shifting medical tastes. Expelled from the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1907 over theological disputes, he had lost institutional support. His fame faded. His eccentric treatments, enemas, yogurt implants, vibrating chairs, became historical curiosities rather than cutting-edge medicine. At 91, frail and alone, John Harvey lived quietly in Battle Creek, his empire reduced to memories. While Keith Kellogg, now in his 80s, was blind from advanced glaucoma. He navigated boardrooms and factory floors with guide dogs from the Rin Tin Tin lineage, still overseeing the company he built and the foundation that bore his name. The rift between the brothers had hardened into decades of silence. Since the 1920 Michigan Supreme Court ruling that stripped John Harvey of the right to use Kellogg on cereals, they had barely spoken. When necessity forced meetings were demanded a third party present, no private conversations allowed. The years of servitude, condescension, and courtroom battles had left wounds too deep for casual healing. In 1941 or 1942, accounts vary slightly on the exact year, John Harvey, sensing his end approaching, decided to reach out. He penned a lengthy letter. Some sources describe it as 7 pages, addressed to his younger brother. In it, he acknowledged past wrongs. He admitted treating Will badly, taking his contributions for granted, and failing to recognize his brother's business genius. "I earnestly desire to make amends for any wrong or injustice of any sort I have done to you," he wrote in one preserved excerpt. He expressed regret for the unbrotherly conduct, the condescension, the humiliation. It was a confession from a proud man who had once dismissed cereal as a sideline, now seeing the empire his brother had created. The letter sought reconciliation, a chance to reopen a bond fractured for nearly 4 decades. The letter was prepared and sealed, but it never reached Will at the time. John Harvey's secretary, protective of her employer's image, filed away rather than mailing it, believing it made him appear weak or diminished. John Harvey died on December 14, 1943, at age 91, of bronchitis or pneumonia in some records, assuming his gesture of amends had been rejected or ignored. He passed without knowing the letter sat undelivered. Years later, in 1948, after it had moved to a smaller home nearby during the war, and the manor had served military purposes. Someone going through John Harvey's old files discovered a sealed envelope addressed to W.K. Kellogg. It was forwarded to him. Now 88, completely blind, could not read it himself. A nurse or aide would have had to read the words aloud. According to historical accounts, he chose not to have it opened immediately. The envelope remained unopened for a time, a silent artifact of unresolved pain. Only after his brother's death did Will finally allow it to be read to him. No diary entry, letter, or interview records his exact reaction. Regret, anger, quiet satisfaction that the truth had finally been acknowledged, or simply a hollow recognition that reconciliation was forever impossible. The damage was too profound. 25 years of being treated as a servant, the court fight over credit for Cornflakes, the lifelong condescension, an apology, however sincere, could not erase decades of humiliation. Will lived another 8 years. He continued his work quietly, attending meetings, guiding the foundation's philanthropy, ensuring the company endured. On October 6, 1951, he died at age 91 in Battle Creek of circulatory illness. The man who started with nothing, revolutionized breakfast, and gave away $66 million to help children slipped away peacefully. The W.K. Kellogg Manor House, after Coast Guard and veteran use in the 1940s, stood empty for a period before the foundation transferred to Michigan State University in 1952. Today, it serves as the historic heart of the W.K. Kellogg Biological Station. Open for self-guided tours, events, and research, visitors walk the grounds where mature trees were transplanted overnight, where grandchildren once played, and where silent films flickered in the evenings. The Dutch windmill still stands, the greenhouse blooms, and the lake views remain timeless. In Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek, the brothers rest side by side. John Harvey Kellogg, 1852 to 1943, and Will Keith Kellogg, 1860 to 1951, lie in the family plot, their headstones closer in death than they allowed themselves to be in the final decades of life. Nearby rest other Battle Creek pioneers, Sojourner Truth, C.W. Post, and more. The graves are simple, unassuming, yet they mark the end of a saga that shaped American mornings. The Sanitarium building where it all began became a military hospital in World War II, then faded into other uses. Its grand towers and eccentric therapies are now footnotes in medical history. But cornflakes endure. Every day, millions pour flakes from boxes bearing W.K.'s signature, written over a century ago as a personal guarantee. Few think of the brothers who invented them together, the humiliation that preceded success, or the family fractured in its wake. Will once feared in his diary that he would always be poor. He proved wrong. He became one of America's wealthiest men. He gave away fortunes to children he never met, built a company that still feeds the world. Yet he was right about something deeper. As a boy, he never learned to play. As a man, he never learned to forgive. The letter came too late. Even if it had arrived earlier, some wounds resist words. The brothers are bound forever, by blood, by invention, by hatred, and finally by the quiet Michigan earth. The story of the Kellogg brothers does not end with death. It lingers in the quiet places they left behind, in cemeteries, in institutions, in breakfast bowls across the world, and an enduring contrast between what they built and what they could not mend. Oak Hill Cemetery in Battle Creek sits on a gentle, tree-lined slope. Among its weathered stones lie figures who shaped American history. Sojourner Truth, the abolitionist and orator who spoke truth to power. C.W. Post, the serial pioneer who turned sanitarium-inspired ideas into a rival fortune. And here, in the Kellogg family plot, rest the two brothers whose lives intertwined and then tore apart. John Harvey Kellogg's headstone is modest. Born February 26, 1852, died December 14, 1943. Will Keith Kellogg's lies close beside it. Born April 7, 1860, died October 6, 1951. The dates tell a simple truth. They lived nearly overlapping spans, 91 years each, and die at the same age. In death, they are side by side, closer than they permitted themselves to be for the last 3 decades of life. No grand monuments mark their graves, only names, dates, and the shared surname that once fueled both invention and war. The Battle Creek Sanitarium, where their story began, no longer exists in its original form. The grand Italian Renaissance building with its 14-story tower, once dominating the skyline, became Percy Jones Army Hospital during World War II. After the war, it served various federal purposes before being largely abandoned and demolished in stages. The eccentric treatments, high-volume enemas, rectal yogurt, vibrating chairs, light baths, are now remembered as oddities of early 20th century medicine, relics of an era when health reform blended science, religion, and moral crusade. John Harvey's vision of purifying the body for spiritual readiness faded with changing times and medical understanding. But the cereal that began as a simple sanitarium experiment endures. Every morning, in kitchens from Michigan to Mumbai, people open boxes bearing the name W.K. Kellogg wrote in 1906. The signature, once a bold personal guarantee against imitators, remains printed on packaging more than a century later. Few who pour the golden flakes think of the bookkeeper who ran beside a bicycle with notebook in hand, or the doctor who treated presidents, or the courtroom battles over who owned the family name. Cornflakes became ordinary, which was precisely their triumph. The Gull Lake Manor stands preserved. Now part of Michigan State University's W.K. Kellogg Biological Station, it welcomes researchers, students, and visitors. Self-guided tours allow people to walk the same halls, see the oak-coffered ceilings, the rookwood tile fireplaces, the leaded windows framing lake views. The Dutch windmill still turns on its island. The greenhouse produces flowers and citrus. The grounds, once transformed overnight with mature trees, remain a place of quiet beauty. The bird sanctuary, established in 1927, continues to protect migratory waterfowl along major flyways. The estate that began as a personal cottage has become a shared legacy, exactly as Will and Carrie intended when they deeded it to Battle Creek, to forever play. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation, seated with $66 million in stock, more than half his holdings, has granted billions since 1930. It has funded children's hospitals, rural education, nutrition programs, early childhood development, and inclusive schooling for disabled children. In many ways, it carries forward the care Will could not fully give his own family, especially his disabled grandson Kenneth and the grandchildren lost to tragedy and estrangement. Yet the personal ledger tells a different story. Will once wrote that he feared lifelong poverty. He became one of America's richest men. He revolutionized breakfast for millions, created jobs, built brands, and gave away fortunes. But he never learned to play as a boy, and he never learned to forgive as a man. The letter from his dying brother, finally read after John Harvey's death, came too late to heal anything. Some wounds calcify beyond words. The decades of being treated as a servant, the court fight over credit, the condescension that shaped his adult life, these could not be undone by a final confession. In the end, the brothers' legacy is dual, one of extraordinary creation and one of profound loss. They gave the world cornflakes and a model of health reform that influenced diet and wellness for generations. They also left a cautionary tale of ambition's cost, how pride, resentment, and unforgiveness can fracture the closest bonds. Blood tied them, invention bound them, hatred divided them, and death finally placed them side by side. Today, when a child pours cereal into a bowl, or a researcher walks the Gull Lake grounds, or a foundation grant helps a family in need, the Kellogg name lives on, not as a doctor's title or a businessman's signature, but as something larger, a reminder that even the most ordinary acts, eating breakfast, planting a tree, giving to children, can carry the weight of extraordinary human stories. The war over the Kellogg name is long over. The flakes remain on shelves. The manor overlooks the lake. The graves rest quietly in Battle Creek earth. And the brothers, once divided by everything, are together at last. Not in reconciliation, but in the silence that follows all earthly struggles. More than a century after W.K. Kellogg first scrawled his name on a cereal box in 1906, that signature still appears on packaging worldwide. It remains a quiet testament, the personal mark of a man who rose from broom-selling obscurity to build one of the most recognizable brands in food history. Today, in 2026, Kellogg's products, Cornflakes, Frosted Flakes, Fruit Loops, Rice Krispies, continue to dominate breakfast aisles. The signature endures as a symbol of quality and origin, even as the company has evolved through splits, acquisitions, and changing ownership. Recent shifts, such as Ferrero's $3.1 billion purchase of the North American cereal business in late 2025, underscore the lasting value of what was created. Yet the essence stays, a simple flake, toasted and crisp, bearing the name of the man who refused to let it become generic. The manor at Gull Lake stands as a living monument. Now, the W.K. Kellogg Manor House and Gardens, part of Michigan State University's W.K. Kellogg Biological Station. It is meticulously preserved, restored to its original 1920s grandeur in 2000. The 15,000-square-foot Tudor Revival Home welcomes self-guided tours Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Visitors wander oak-coffered ceilings, rookwood tile fireplaces, leaded windows framing Gull Lake vistas, and the same rooms where silent films once flickered for family nights. The grounds, 32 acres of lawns, gardens, and shoreline, remain open dawn at dusk for walking tours. Downloadable historical guides detail the carriage house, caretaker's cottage, boathouse, lakeside pagoda, and the ornamental Dutch windmill on its island. The greenhouse still supplies seasonal blooms, echoing Will's insistence on immediate beauty. Private events, weddings, and conferences fill the space, turning a personal retreat into a community destination. The estate he deeded for all of Battle Creek to forever play continues that promise. Nearby, the W.K. Kellogg Bird Sanctuary thrives. Established in 1927, when we'll purchase over farm land around Wintergreen Lake, fencing 180 acres to protect and breed waterfowl, it sits at the intersection of major migration routes. Initially focused on reestablishing game birds like Canada geese that endangered, it pioneered conservation efforts. Biologists here help repopulate trumpeter swans in Michigan, a species once nearly extinct. Today, the sanctuary integrates research, education, and outreach, housing injured raptors, owls, eagles, pheasants, and quail that cannot return to the wild. It remains a vital stop for migratory birds and a place where people connect with nature, fulfilling Will's vision of appreciation for wildlife. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation carries forward his deepest commitment. Founded in 1930 with an initial gift that grew to $66 million in his lifetime, over half his stock, it has granted billions since. In fiscal year 2024 alone, it distributed about $408 million, with new commitments of $262 million focused on children's health, education, equity, and community well-being, especially in priority places like Michigan, Mississippi, New Mexico, New Orleans, Haiti, and Mexico. Racial equity remains central, with investments in early childhood, food systems, and healing. The Foundation's assets, combined its trust, reached $9.4 billion by late 2024, enabling sustained impact. Will called himself selfish for the joy of helping children. Today, that joy manifests in hospitals, schools, nutrition programs, and inclusive education, often inspired by his grandson Kenneth's struggles. In Oak Hill Cemetery, Battle Creek, the brothers lie in the family plot, Section A, Lot 4. John Harvey Kellogg, 1852 to 1943, and will Keith Kellogg, 1860 to 1951, share the earth, side by side, their headstones simple and unadorned. Nearby rest Sojourner Truth, C.W. Post, and other pioneers. Tourists visit for the history, abolitionists, inventors, serial barons. The graves are quiet, a final proximity after decades of distance. No reconciliation came in life. Death provided only physical closeness. The Sanitarium's grand buildings are gone, demolished after military and federal use. Its bizarre therapies are footnotes in medical history. But the ripple effects remain. Health reform ideas that influence diet, wellness movements, and even modern cereal culture. The flakes that started as bland health food became a global staple. Now free of certain artificial dyes and ongoing commitments, adapted to contemporary tastes and values, will fear perpetual poverty. He amassed wealth beyond imagination. He never learned to play as a child, nor forgive as an adult. The unopened letter symbolized that final failure. Yet his legacy transcends personal tragedy. It lives in the signature on every box. The preserved manor overlooking a lake, the sanctuary where birds still migrate, the foundation helping vulnerable children thrive. The brother's story is one of invention and fracture, ambition and loss. In the end, what endures is not the feud, but the ordinary miracle of breakfast. Flakes pour into bowls each morning, carrying forward the name of two men who, despite everything, change how the world begins its day. More than a century after Keith Kellogg first placed his signature on a box of toasted cornflakes in 1906, that handwritten mark still appears on packaging sold in nearly every corner of the globe. It is one of the most enduring personal brands in consumer history, a quiet promise of quality from a man who once had nothing to offer but his labor and his name. In 2026, Kellogg's products remain breakfast staples. Cornflakes, the original, continue to sit on shelves beside newer siblings, Frosted Flakes, Special K, Rice Krispies, Fruit Loops, each box carrying the same W.K. Kellogg signature that once distinguished it from dozens of Battle Creek imitators. The company itself has transformed. In late 2025, Ferrero, the Italian confectionery giant behind Nutella and Ferrero Rocher, acquired the North American ready-to-eat cereal business from Kellanova, the former Kellogg company, for $3.1 billion. The deal separated the iconic cereal portfolio from the snacks and plant-based divisions, yet the core products, especially cornflakes, retained their historic branding. The signature endures as a bridge between past and present, reminding consumers that these flakes began not as a corporate invention, but as the work of one determined man who refused to let his creation become anonymous. Every morning, in homes from Michigan to Mumbai, people pour the golden flakes into bowls without knowing the decades of struggle, betrayal, and triumph behind that name. The W.K. Kellogg Manor House at Gull Lake remains a living testament to Will's final years of achievement. Now managed by Michigan State University as part of the W.K. Kellogg Biological Station, the 15,000-square-foot Tudor Revival Home is open for self-guided tours most weekdays. Visitors step into the same oak panel rooms where silent films once played for family gatherings, where leaded windows once framed the lake at dawn, and where Will and Carrie entertained grandchildren who ran across lawns he never knew as a child. The Dutch windmill still stands on its island, turning slowly in the breeze. The greenhouse continues to supply seasonal flowers and citrus, echoing Will's refusal to wait for anything to mature naturally. The boathouse, pagoda, and carriage house complete the picture of a gentleman's estate built not for ostentation, but for immediate joy and shared beauty. The grounds, 32 acres of rolling lawns, formal gardens, and 1,600 feet of private shoreline, remain open daily from dawn to dusk for walking and reflection. The estate's original deed to Battle Creek, stipulating it become a place where all of Battle Creek may forever play, has been honored through decades of public access, educational programs, and community events. Weddings, conferences, and school groups now fill spaces once reserved for family. The manor that began as a private cottage has become a public legacy, preserving both the architectural splendor and the quiet intention behind it. Nearby, the W.K. Kellogg Bird Sanctuary continues its mission. Founded in 1927, when Will purchased degraded farmland around Wintergreen Lake and fenced 180 acres to protect migratory waterfowl, the sanctuary sits at the crossroads of major flyways. It played a pioneering role in reintroducing Canada geese and trumpeter swans to Michigan, species once nearly lost. Today it houses non-releasable raptors, owls, eagles, and other birds while serving as a living laboratory for conservation research and public education. Visitors can walk trails, watch migrating flocks, and learn about habitat restoration, fulfilling Will's late-life desire to create refuge for creatures that, like him, had been overlooked. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation remains one of the most influential philanthropic organizations in the world. Seated with $66 million in company stock during Will's lifetime, more than half his holdings, is granted billions since 1930. In recent years, annual distributions have exceeded $400 million, focusing on children's health, education, racial equity, food systems, and community resilience in priority regions, including Michigan, Mississippi, New Mexico, New Orleans, Haiti, and Mexico. Programs support early childhood development, inclusive schooling for disabled children, a direct echo of grandson Kenneth's struggles, nutrition access, and healing initiatives. The Foundation's endowment, combined with its trust, continues to grow, ensuring Will's selfish joy in helping children reaches new generations. In Oak Hill Cemetery, Battle Creek, the brothers rest in the family plot. John Harvey Kellogg, 1852 to 1943, and Will Keith Kellogg, 1860 to 1951, lies side by side, 2 headstones, 2 names, 1 shared surname. The graves are simple, unadorned, yet they draw quiet visitors. Historians, cereal enthusiasts, and those curious about the human cost of invention. Nearby lie Sojourner Truth and C.W. Post, reminders that Battle Creek was once a crucible of abolition, health reform, and entrepreneurial ambition. The Sanitarium's grand buildings are long gone, its treatments now historical footnotes. But the flakes that started as a bland health food in the Sanitarium kitchen became a global icon. Adapted, flavored, marketed, and beloved, the war over the Kellogg name ended long ago. The signature lives on. Will feared lifelong poverty. He became one of America's wealthiest men. He gave away fortunes to children he never met. He built an empire that still feeds millions. Yet he never learned to play as a boy, nor to forgive as a man. The unopened letter from his dying brother symbolized that final, irreparable distance. Some wounds resist healing, even when death brings physical closeness. Today, when someone reaches for a box of cornflakes, they touch a century-old promise signed by a man who rose from servitude to sovereignty. The flakes are ordinary now, exactly as were intended, but the story behind them is anything but a tale of brothers bound by blood and invention, divided by pride and resentment, and finally laid to rest in the same Michigan earth. The signature endures. So does the silence between 2 graves. And somewhere in between lies the complicated truth of success, loss, and the price of a name. The Kellogg brothers' story is not merely a chapter in American business history. It is a mirror reflecting the complexities of ambition, family, invention, and forgiveness. From the strict Seventh-day Adventist soil of Battle Creek in the 1860s to the global breakfast tables of 2026, their intertwined lives produce something ordinary yet profound. The modern bowl of cornflakes. What began as a bland health food experiment in a sanitarium kitchen, designed to calm passions and aid digestion, became a cultural staple, sweetened, marketed, and signed into existence by a man who had spent decades in his brother's shadow. Well, Keith Kellogg never intended to start a revolution. He sought independence after 25 years of servitude, running beside a bicycle with notebook ready, taking dictation in bathrooms, always addressed as subordinate. His 1906 decision to found the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company was an act of self-liberation, adding sugar and salt for taste, launching the daring Wink at Your Grocer campaign, and placing his signature on every box. These were practical moves by a practical man who understood consumers wanted enjoyment, not just medicine. The result, a product that transformed mornings for millions, created jobs, built wealth, and reshaped the food industry. John Harvey Kellogg, the charismatic physician who treated presidents and preached purity, contributed the initial idea but never grasped its commercial potential. His world was health reform through extreme measures, enemas, yogurt from both ends, vibrating chairs, warnings against the solitary vice. Cereal was a sideline, a dietary tool. When his younger brother's success eclipsed his own, resentment grew into legal war. The 1920 Michigan Supreme Court ruling granted Will exclusive rights to the family name on cereals, a decisive victory that severed their professional ties and deepened their personal estrangement. The personal toll was immense. Will's family fractured. A grandson disabled for life after a fall, a brilliant son fired and disowned over perceived disloyalty. Another grandson lost to suicide under pressure. Sons broke contact. Blindness struck in his later years. Yet he channeled grief into generosity. The W.K. Kellogg Foundation, launched in 1930 amid the Great Depression, has granted billions, focusing on children's health, education, equity, and community strength. In recent years, commitments have exceeded $260 million annually, supporting early childhood programs, racial healing, food systems, and inclusive education in regions like Michigan, Mississippi, New Mexico, New Orleans, Haiti, and Mexico. Will call it selfish for the joy it brought. Today it continues that mission, helping children he never met. The Gull Lake Manor, his cottage of 15,000 square feet, stands preserved as part of Michigan State University's W.K. Kellogg Biological Station. In 2026, The Tudor Revival Home opens for self-guided tours Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Call ahead for group bookings. Visitors explore oak-coffered ceilings, rookwood-tiled fireplaces, leaded windows overlooking the lake, and the same spaces where grandchildren once played and silent film screened. The 32-acre grounds, including the ornamental windmill, greenhouse, boathouse, and pagoda, remain open dawn to dusk for walking. The estate he deeded for public play continues at promise through events, weddings, conferences, and research. The W.K. Kellogg Bird Sanctuary thrives nearby. Founded in 1927 to protect migratory waterfowl like Canada geese and trumpeter swans, it integrates conservation, education, and rehabilitation. In early 2026, after winter closure, December 22nd, 2025 to January 2nd, 2026, it reopened with trails, programs, and coffee chats on backyard birds, fulfilling Will's vision of refuge for the overlooked. The serial legacy evolves. In September 2025, Ferrero completed its $3.1 billion acquisition of W.K. Kellogg Company, making it a wholly owned subsidiary. By February 2026, Ferrero appointed insider Jean-Baptiste Santel to lead the business, vowing to accelerate growth and strengthen market leadership. Iconic brands, Cornflakes, Rice Krispies, Fruit Loops, carry forward under new ownership, with the signature still prominent. A Super Bowl ad in 2026 for Raisin brand Mark Ferrero's push into American breakfast, blending Nutella heritage with Kellogg tradition. In Oak Hill Cemetery, Battle Creek, the brothers rest in the family plot, Section A, Lot 4. John Harvey, 1852 to 1943, and O'Keefe, 1860 to 1951, lies side by side. Simple headstones bearing names once fought over in court. Tourists visit alongside graves of Sojourner Truth and C.W. Post, drawn to a site that encapsulates ambition's dual legacy, creation and division. The Sanitarium faded, its buildings repurposed and demolished, its treatments now historical quirks. But the flakes endure. They are ordinary, which was Will's genius, turning a health food experiment into something accessible, enjoyable, and reliable. The signature on every box is more than branding. It's a reminder of a man who started with nothing, endured humiliation, built an empire, gave away millions, and never fully reconciled with his brother. The unopened letter symbolizes what could not be mended. Death brought physical closeness, but not healing. Some wounds, formed over decades, resist final words. Yet the story's true power lies in its contradictions. Invention-born collaboration and conflict, wealth from poverty, generosity from personal loss, a cottage that became a shared haven. The Kellogg brothers gave the world cornflakes and a cautionary tale. Success can feed millions, build fortunes, preserve nature, and uplift children. It cannot always mend families or erase resentment. In kitchens worldwide, someone pours flakes into a bowl. The sound is crisp, familiar, unremarkable. Behind it echoes a century of human complexity. Two brothers, one signature, one enduring breakfast revolution.